Johnny Mack is in the house. He's got more on that decision and the draft and the Eagles and the NFL right now on the Sports Bash Live on 97.3 ESPN. And, John, as you write at 973ESPN.com, this was an easy decision for Howie Roseman. But how much was Lamar Jackson still being available factored into that decision?
I think it was important as far as the phone calls kind of picked up when the reality that he was going to be there because we talked about it a lot, the ability to trade back in and get that fifth-year option, especially for the quarterback position, is always very important. So the fact that it was still on the board, I think there was interest because of that fifth-year option, but it only increased when it became a quarterback on top of it. So I think that helped the Eagles out a lot. And they got a pretty significant package. And the fact that you get a future second-round pick, obviously it doesn't seem that way this year, but that's pretty significant for doing what they did.
So they get the 52nd pick, and then they swap, third or, I guess, fourth-round picks. They don't have a third. And then they add that pick next year. So essentially Roseman is saying, look, we're pretty good right now. We're well off with what we currently have, but I will take the pick next year to drop down 20 spots, saying that pick 52 is not that far of a drop-off from 32.
Yeah, this year it isn't. Scouts in this league believe there were anywhere from 20 to 23, 24 truly first-round talents. And then from that, you kind of talk about 25 to 50, and it was pretty even in most people's minds. And just by the nature of the quarterback position, you do the math, 5 guys went. Probably a couple more will go in the second round. That pushes position players down. So if the Eagles are at 52, they're probably going to get one of those players anyway. And that was their feeling. And the one thing Howie was kind of, I wouldn't say disingenuous, but their plan was to trade this pick. That's what they wanted. And he claimed that wasn't, but you're never going to say that, because if you are forced to stay and take a player, you want to spin it as positively as possible. But the reality is, where the Eagles' situation and the fact that there were a lot of decent prospects that they could have went with, but they all would have been luxuries on this roster, not guys expected to contribute right away. So the reality of them being the Super Bowl champions and a very deep team helped as well.
John, I know that Howie Roseman, people like to jump toward Joe Douglas and that Ravens connection all the time, but Ozzie Newsome retiring as the GM of the Ravens, and what was his relationship with Howie, and how did that factor in to them being dance partners?
Yeah, I think it factors in a lot, and even from the Joe Douglas and Andy Weidel aspect, because they grew up sort of under Ozzie Newsome. They certainly trust him. So the relationship is a good one to begin with, and obviously when it is in this type of situation, it makes it easier to complete deals like that, and that's what happened. Obviously, the Ravens are in a position where they need the heir apparent to Joe Flacco, and they were able to get it, and part of the reason was they probably had a better relationship with the Eagles than other teams looking to try to go up in that spot.
Yeah, John, and the Eagles, so they had 32, they moved down to 52, they flopped the 2 fourth-round picks. So if they're in the 52 range, do you think it is a significant drop? Because I saw some people asking the question, well, they still have 6 picks. They didn't really add picks like many people thought when they made a trade, that they were going to add a second and a third to make up for the fact they didn't have one. So are you okay with taking the pick next year as opposed to gaining maybe a second and third in this year's draft?
Yeah, I'm okay for that reason. I said it's a very deep team, so people have to understand, if you get enamored by a name, whether it's Harold Landry or Maurice Hurst, well, think about the Eagles and think about the players they have at those particular positions. Those guys aren't going to play a heck of a lot. Now, maybe they might develop down the road, but this dread of immediacy and the fact that the Eagles went down 20 spots this year, as you mentioned, they went up 7 spots in the 4th round. If you're going to be closed-minded, it doesn't look good for this year. But then you have the 2nd-round pick next year, and that's what the Eagles are thinking. It's not a static thing. When you talk about roster building, you generally think in 3-year increments, and the Eagles know, as we've talked about a lot, they have salary cap issues. They're only getting worse next year. So the fact that you're able to add another asset who will be a cost-effective draft pick in a year where you might need more help because you have to make decisions with Brandon Graham and Michael Bennett and players like that on the defensive line. When you talk about players like Landry and Hurst this year, the value is still there. It's just not immediate.
So, John, the Eagles have 52 tonight. You have listed on our website, 973ESPN.com, the top day 2 talent, and this was constructed talking to some scouts. 3 different scouts gave you some information, and based on that, who are some of the guys that will be available when the Eagles come a-calling?
Well, I'm still looking at the running back position because I think, and Ronald Jones is the one name that keeps jumping out at me because I think, A, he might last that long. Darius Geis is still on the board as well, but I don't see any way he's going to fall to 52. And as I said earlier in the week, Jones is a guy who just looks like a Doug Peterson, Andy Reid type running back as a 3-down guy, projecting him that way. Obviously, it's going to take him a while to get up to speed, but he's got receiving skills. He can run the football. He can be a 3-down back. So that's a guy I would keep a very close eye on. If you look at offensive tackle, there's a lot of names. Connor Williams is the best. I don't think he's going to be there. But there's a lot of good talent, and that's what we talked about from the drop-off and the fact that 32 isn't going to be much different from 52, and that's how the scouts kind of pegged it, not just the Eagle scouts, but scouts all around this league. Talent is going to be very, very similar in those 2 positions.
So, John, let's give you the floor and hear your thoughts on what the Browns did at 1 and 4.
Well, quarterback is, and I think I said it yesterday, it's beauty in the eye of the beholder. If they like the quarterback, that's what they have to do. If they believe in him, that's what they have to do. From the outside looking in, they had the number 1 pick, obviously, and the number 4 pick, as you mentioned, and they didn't get the best quarterback, and they didn't get either of the 2 best position players. And that seems very Cleveland Browns-ish. But we'll see. The one part I do give them credit for, John Dorsey at least realizes the value of the quarterback position, unlike Sashi Brown and Paul DePodesta before him, who passed on Carson Wentz and Deshaun Watson. And if they didn't do that, they wouldn't have been in this position. But, look, I think they made mistakes, to be honest, and that just seems to follow the Cleveland Browns no matter who's in charge.
My big question, John, has been, did they have Baker Mayfield ranked significantly higher than the other guys, to which they didn't maybe take a player they liked better at 1 and then wait for the quarterback to see who's there at 4? Or is this a sign that they had Mayfield significantly higher than the others?
I don't think it's a sign of that. I think it's a sign of the reality is that only one person that runs a franchise had the opportunity to get the quarterback he wanted. So you can't mess around with that. If you think he's the best quarterback, you got to take him at number 1. That's just how this league works. So I don't have an issue with that part of it. I think, and I'm scolding myself for this. If you saw the picture of the Browns' war room immediately after the pick, right smack dab in the middle was Scott McClugan, the former personnel chief in Washington. He's very good friends with John Dorsey. He's been talking up Baker Mayfield forever. He's obviously got his ear. I think a lot of us in this league should have realized it a lot quicker that was the way they were going to go. But no, if he's the guy you like, you can't wait to 4. You can't mess around with that. So that part of it, I have no issue with it. The part I have an issue with, I don't think there's any way he turns out to be better than Sam Darnold or Josh Rosen. But I'll put one caveat on that as well. Where you land has so much to do with it. You know, I often think back to 1999, and that was the last time 5 quarterbacks went in the first round, and that was obviously the Donovan McNabb year. And you think, what if Tim Couch or Akili Smith ended up with Andy Reid? Would they have been stars? And what if Donovan was forced to go into the situations they were forced to go in? Would he have been a star? I don't know. There are certain guys, Peyton Manning, Tom Brady, they're going to be stars no matter what, anywhere. A lot of other quarterbacks, it depends where they land and the situation they go to.
Of course, if Donovan went somewhere else, he still wouldn't have known that the games could end in a tie, right, John?
Yeah,
that's an unfair shot.
No, it's not.
That's, you know, you'd be surprised.
He's not here to defend himself.
You'd be surprised how many football players don't know certain rules. Most of them do know the tie, though. So Donovan deserves a little criticism for that.
John, I know that you thought the Giants needed a quarterback. So when Sam Darnold was there and they passed on him, were you stunned, shocked?
Not completely shocked. I was. I think they made a horrible mistake. I think it's clear they were lying because what they were spinning is that Darnold was the only quarterback they would take, and then when they didn't expect him to be available, which would have allowed them to take Barkley. Then he turned out to be available, and they passed on him. So clearly they were not telling the truth about that part of it. But look, Dave Gettleman said after at his press conference that positional value in this league is a crock, which that quote is a crock. It's just, it's ridiculous to say that. And I always point back to Adrian Peterson during his MVP season because that is the best single season from a running back I've ever seen, ever. I think you might have to go back to Jim Brown. And to do it in this era, which is so pass-heavy, he was unbelievable. Minnesota would have 3rd and 8s and convert running the football. Is Saquon Barkley ever going to be that? If he is, God bless him. The odds are against him. But the reason I bring that up is because that year, the Vikings made the playoffs, but they eked into the playoffs. And they were one and done. The reality is, it doesn't matter how good your running back is. If you don't have a quarterback, you don't have a chance to win in this league at the highest level. So if people think Eli Manning's got more left in the tank than I do, as I said, great, but it's certainly not going to be a long shelf life. So the Giants are going to be looking for a quarterback, and they're going to rue the day that they didn't take it when they had the opportunity.
Johnny Mac's with us at JF McMullen. What do you think about Dallas taking Vander Esch? I know he's a guy the Eagles really liked. You thought, he was a guy that the Eagles would have been interested in had he got down there, but went a lot higher than obviously in the 32 area. So what do you think about Dallas going that way?
Yeah, well, I know the Dallas fans weren't happy, but they wanted a receiver, and, fans want skill position players, and they wanted to replace Dez Bryant. But I think it's a tremendous pick for him. I think the Eagles, as I said yesterday, were hoping the whispers of a neck problem would have him dropping a little bit. But if you think about his athletic gifts and how big he is, 255-pound linebackers, you can stick him in the middle with Sean Lee and Jalen Smith. They're pretty good on paper defensively, and they're getting better. I think it was a good pick, so I assume Jerry wasn't involved, and Stephen Jones took it.
John McMullen's with us here on the Sports Bash 97.3 ESPN. And, John, you go to Washington, and they get an Alabama defensive lineman for the second straight year here. Did you like that Washington, both those teams kind of played the safe route. Both went with the defensive player. As you mentioned, the Dallas fans probably wanted that flashy wide out pick, and I'm sure the Washington fans probably were looking for a skill position player as well. But did you like the direction that Washington ends up going?
Yeah, I think they're a little disappointed. There was a little run there where teams were just destroying people and taking the players they wanted. San Francisco at 9 took Mike McGlinchey. The Raiders wanted Mike McGlinchey at 10, and they sort of panicked and traded back and reached for Colton Miller. If you look at Arizona trading up to get Josh Rosen, Miami wanted him at 11. They jumped right in front of him. And that sort of happened with Tampa Bay. They took Vita V. I can't even say his name, but the big nose tackle. That's the player the Washington Redskins wanted, but they stayed the course and they took a nose tackle. They took the second best one, but they were one of the worst teams in football defending the run last year. So they need a big body in the middle, and they got the second best one, but there's no question they wanted the other kid.
That was Daron Payne, by the way, out of Alabama that they ended up taking.
Right. Another Alabama kid going to Washington. John, we'll close with this. We know there's no stone unturned for you and the Eagles beat reporters. They'll chase down every lead. Are you guys going to have to start camping out on this Orange Beach? I mean, I don't even know where it is. Did you look? Is it the Orange Beach in the Gulf Coast there in Alabama? What are they talking about?
Howie Summerhoff. It was late. I think most of us were a little drunk on tiredness, and Howie certainly among them. That was the quickest press conference Howie's ever had, and that's because that thing is long, man, and it takes some stamina when you're at number 32.
No doubt. And by the way, there was a trade last night in the Raiders and Pittsburgh. Martavius Bryant, he got traded to the Raiders for the 79th overall pick. So we saw that. We saw the Patriots go with Sony Michel. A lot of people like that pick for them, the Georgia running back. So there were some other interesting storylines deeper in the draft. We'll have the second and third rounds of the draft tonight. The coverage starts at 6 o'clock right here on 97.3 ESPN. You can follow John on Twitter. He's been tweeting a lot about the draft at JF McMullen. And, of course, he is back on Monday with his thoughts on the entire NFL draft. Thank you, my friend.
All right, enjoy the rest of the draft, boys.